Welcome back to another episode of Pig and Whiskey Test Kitchen. Today we are finding a use for our brisket leftovers. Now some of you may be asking what are brisket leftovers because you typically eat the entire brisket, but not everybody can eat a whole brisket in one sitting. So we're going to explore what to do with them leftovers. Recently we cooked a triple contest, meaning we cooked 3 briskets in one weekend. So now I'm sitting on a stockpile of brisket trying to figure out what to do with it. And here is one of the ideas I came up with. We will be making Mississippi Delta style hot tamales. But first, a little backstory. I grew up in Arkansas, just a stone's throw from the Mississippi Delta. If you visit barbecue restaurants along this region, you'll often see hot tamales on their sides menu. While the tamale is most certainly a Mexican dish dating back to the Aztecs, the American South has lovingly embraced the tamale and adapted it into their cuisine. As the story goes, migrant workers from Mexico would pass through following the cotton harvest, bringing with them their culinary traditions. It is thought that these migrant workers shared these recipes with the local populations, more specifically the African American plantation workers. And thus the tamale became forever a Southern delicacy. Okay, let's get started. We have about 3 pounds of leftover brisket I have already pre-sliced into chunks. This will make it easier to shred in the food processor. Ideally, what we want to do is shred the beef, but we want to avoid over-processing and turning it into a paste. So what I'm going to do is drop in about 2 or 3 chunks at a time and pulse it until we get the right consistency. Then we will remove any larger chunks so that we don't further process and turn what is already shredded into paste. So here we are removing the bowl and scraping the contents out into our container. We are going to replace the work bowl and drop a few more chunks in and continue until we have about 2 pounds of shredded brisket. So, in a barbecue competition, when you trim your brisket, there is often a lot of leftover scraps. Now, some folks will save those scraps and grind them up into hamburgers. However, I go ahead and cook all my scraps in a pan alongside the brisket. And we always end up with quite a bit of leftover scraps. But I always find good uses for them. Today's recipe is using those scraps. Notice what I'm doing with the meat here. I'm trying to form a log and see if the meat will hold its shape. It seems a little dry and crumbly, so we're going to add a couple of ingredients to help that. Here I have brisket drippings that I saved from our recent competitions. We're going to add 2 heaping tablespoons of brisket fat. Now, if you don't have brisket fat that you saved from your last cook, you can use lard instead. And if you absolutely had to, Crisco would work as well. Now, it might seem like we are adding a lot of fat to these tamales, but most of it is going to cook off. And also, the cornmeal we're going to use will require a lot of that fat. So after we add a little more, we're going to mix it thoroughly. It is still a little dry, so we're going to add about a 1/4 cup of beef stock. You're going to repeat this process if necessary until the log maintains its shape and doesn't crumble easily. It should look a lot like a cat turd shape. Okay, once you get to that point, we're ready to assemble our tamales. Today we will be using the Instant Pot. First thing that goes into the pot will be our seasoning. We are using Cosmos cow cover. Place 1 tablespoon in the pot. We don't need a whole lot of seasoning because our brisket should already be properly seasoned. Next up, we're going to add 1 teaspoon of Boar's Night Out White Lightning. Go ahead and dump that in the pot. Then to that, we're going to add 1 15-ounce can of tomato sauce. Your favorite brand will do. After you dump that into the pot, it's time to assemble our tamales. We're going to assemble them one by one and place them in the pot. We are starting off with about 1 cup of cornmeal. Spread that around on the plate, and then we're going to season it with our cow cover. Now keep in mind that if you don't have this particular rub, you can instead use the standard SPG combination, which is salt, pepper, and garlic in even proportions. And that will work for both the pot and the seasoning of the cornmeal. Next up, we're going to be assembling our tamales in coffee filters. It used to be folks didn't have access to stores like Amazon to order their corn husks from, so if they didn't grow them in their garden and save them, then they had to resort to other materials. Coffee filters were cheap and readily available and is still a common wrapper for the Mississippi Delta tamale. Here we are forming our cat turd shapes, and after we have one formed, we are going to go ahead and roll it in the litter box. The cornmeal should readily adhere to the fat and moisture in the meat. Once that is thoroughly coated, we're going to place it on our coffee filter and roll it up tightly. At about halfway up, we're going to fold the sides in, one side, then the other, then finish rolling the rest of the way, much like a tiny burrito. Once you have that tamale rolled, you can use your fingers to shape it so that they're more round and even. Go ahead and place it seam side down into the sauce. Now continue rolling them until you have used all of your meat, being careful not to overfill your Instant Pot. Once you place your last tamale in the pot, we no longer need the cornmeal. This is what the pot should look like when your tamales are placed inside. Then to the pot, we're going to add the rest of our container of beef stock that we opened earlier. You may or may not need to use the entire container as we are just trying to cover the tops of the tamales. Take a peek inside the pot. It should look about like this. These tamales are ready to cook. Place the lid on, then set your timer for 20 minutes and walk away. Fast forward approximately 1.5 hours and our tamales have cooked and cooled to the point that we can now open the Instant Pot safely. Now you might want to let them go a little more to cool as the tamales will firm up. Here I am testing one by using my tongs. I'm checking the stability of the tamale, and I'm also going to do a little bit of a taste test. We're just going to spread it out carefully. They are still very hot. So while I have made brisket tamales before, I've never actually made A-9 Wagyu brisket tamales. Here is my unscripted reaction.
Holy that's good.
The more you let your tamales cool, the more they will set up and become firm in the wrappers. Once you have reached this point, take them one by one and place them into a container. If you notice, as I get towards the end, the tamales, they get softer and softer. That's because the ones at the bottom still maintain their heat level. Now that they're in the container, we're going to pop them in the fridge and cool them down. Unfortunately, a couple tamales didn't make it, and that's okay. We will just fish out the wrappers and consider that an addition to the sauce. Go ahead and dump the sauce into a bowl, and we're going to cover that and set aside. It is now the next day, and we have our cast iron skillet on the stove coming up to temperature. It's over medium heat, and once it comes up to temp, then we can place our tamales in the pan. The tamales have been in the fridge overnight and have firmed up nicely, as you can see. We don't want to overheat these or completely melt them, we just want to warm them to serving temperature. Okay, once we get the tamales in the pan, we're going to go ahead and put a lid on them so they can steam slowly in their own juices. If you see that maybe there's not enough liquid in the pan, go ahead and add a couple of tablespoons of water to the pan, then simply replace the lid and let them steam. You can kind of shuffle them around a little bit and make sure they're not burning on the bottom, but it's not really necessary to flip them or turn them. Just make sure they are slowly coming up to temperature. Now that these tamales are up to temperature, we're going to go ahead and set them aside and grab a small saucepan. To that pan, we're going to add the sauce we saved from the Instant Pot yesterday. We're going to pour approximately 1 cup into the pan. And while the sauce by itself would be fine over the tamales, we're going to dress it up just a little bit by adding barbecue sauce. Here we have some Head Country Chipotle, and we're going to add exactly 1 cup of sauce to the pan. Go ahead and whisk that to combine and bring it up to temperature. Careful that you don't burn it, but your goal here is to warm it so that it doesn't cool down the tamales. Go ahead and place your tamale on the plate. Gently unroll them. They should be sort of fragile, but they should also stay together for the most part. My competition brain here is taking over by cleaning the plate, but now we're going to drizzle just a little bit of our sauce over the top. And as you can see, they would be perfectly fine to be served just like this. However, we're going to take this one step further. In my hometown of Hot Springs, Arkansas, there is a barbecue restaurant called McLard's Barbecue, and one of the most popular items on their menu is the tamale spread. As you can see, the tamale spread closely resembles nachos, but if I'm not mistaken, I believe this dish predates the arrival of the nacho. Alright, we're going to start with a handful of Fritos sprinkled over our tamales. After the corn chips, we're going to ladle over a healthy portion of beans. And after the beans, we're going to stack on an orgasmic amount of chopped brisket. After that, we'll drizzle over our sauce that we created earlier, just enough to cover the beef. Once that's done, we're going to sprinkle it with a mountain of shredded cheese. And now for the garnish. Some slices of hot peppers and a small stack of saltine crackers. I never really understood the saltines. I just assumed it's to help shovel the food onto your fork, but I don't know. And here is our trash-tastic final product. It is cheesy, beefy, and delicious. Thank you for joining us today in the Pig and Whiskey Test Kitchen. Hope to see you next time. Subscribe.